Welcome to Recruiter Fuel. For those of you that have had your job displaced by COVID-19 or the coronavirus, which we know not just here in Michigan, but across the United States, a lot of people had, we wanted to put together a program this week that really highlighted resume building. What should be on your resume, maybe some things you should begin omitting from your resume. And we also know that a lot of you have not had the opportunity to create or craft a new resume in a long time simply because you haven't had to. So with me today are two of our senior recruiting consultants, Marianne Lee and Melissa McLean. We wanted to get the ball rolling really with kind of how you should format your resume. I did a post a couple of weeks ago where I talked about the objective part of your resume that, Marianne and Melissa and I have been recruiting for a long time, and what we've been accustomed to seeing over the years is a section at the top of your resume that said objective and a couple of sentences either about yourself or what you were trying to do or what your target was. In that post, I mentioned that the objective section of a resume probably can start going away simply because, if you're an active applicant looking for a role, your objective is to get a job. There's also times where mistakes can be made within the objective section. So Melissa, we'll start with you. As you think about the formatting of a resume, what are your thoughts relative to, what should be sitting at the top of the resume if we're replacing the objective section?
For me, I always, as simple as it is, but putting your name large enough for people to see it, right? And also distinguishing your contact information. So email and phone number, that way, that for me always should be at the top. I think there's sometimes I prefer to see education at the top. I mainly was recruiting for accounting and finance a lot. So it was very important to see your education. Do you have a CPA? So that was supposed to be prominent. So I guess depending on industry, that can kind of be back and forth, right? But a lot of times I feel like hiring managers, if that is a requirement that you maybe have a master's or some certain certificate for your profession, they really like to see that up at the top. You don't necessarily have to put the year that you graduated or, you can just put completed. But I think when you get to a certain point in your career, when that's at the top, it's assumed, and the recruiter typically will ask. But those are the top two, I guess, I would like to see at the forefront of a resume, just for starting off point.
Yeah, and thank you. I want to just kind of add on to that, just to keep it simple. We see so many resumes and they start to all look alike. But if there's different things as far as it's in italics or if it's bold, even sometimes in different color that stands out. I've even seen some resumes that have like checkpoints, bullet points. And when they get to the part of where they've worked in the past, if that company has a logo, then put that logo on that resume. Be it Amazon, be it Microsoft, put the company logo in the body of the resume. Again, we don't want to see pages and pages and pages, but maybe up to 2. Don't need to go back 20, 30 years. Just 10 years to go back in your career and to just put in some major accomplishments that you've done. We don't need to see a book, but just some major highlights of your success. Also, put in there about your volunteer work. People think that that's not important, but put in your volunteer work is very key. Professional associations that you belong to is very helpful. And if you speak any foreign languages, my goodness, that goes at the top, right underneath your education, because speaking a foreign language is very key nowadays. That's something that really stands out for me as well.
Thanks, Marianne. Let's talk a little bit about length of resume, since that was one of the things that you highlighted. I remember, and I don't want to give away my age directly, but I remember recruiting back in the day for IT programmers, and I would get books, 12, 14, 16-page resumes for some reason. Is there kind of a rule of thumb now? I've heard people talk about, maybe 1 page for every 10 years of your career is a good rule of thumb. But Marianne, is there kind of a good hard and fast rule because I've also heard a lot of people and seen a lot of people post on LinkedIn where they say your resume should be no longer than 1 page. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think your resume should encompass your career experience and things relative to the role that you're looking for. But I do think brevity is also important. So
Yes.
the long form resumes probably need to go. What are your thoughts, Marianne, around length of resume, and if it is 2 pages as you suggested, what things should they be thinking about maybe leaving off if they're longer than 2 pages?
Well, unfortunately, there's times that people have a very established career and they want to show everything that they've done, the patents that they've created, the books that they've authored. Lawyers want to talk about their different cases because I recruit a lot of attorneys, so they want to talk about their cases. Maybe just, again, it's tough. But once you get to that 3, 4, 5 page, it kind of gets kind of redundant. Just highlight some of the major things that you've done in the last 5 years, some of the patents that you might have created if you're an engineer, if you're an attorney, some of the top 5 cases that you worked on and what was the success behind it. I just know that looking at resumes that are more than 2 or 3 pages long, I just don't want to see all of that, unfortunately, because we see so many. And what I'm looking for is, why is this person going to be the right pick for my client's needs? So I think the 2, 3 pages is too much. I think it's getting to that point where it's just after the 3rd page, it's just a little bit too much. But I can understand why people want to show the successes. I'm a successful engineer. I got all these patents. And maybe you can put it off to the side, or maybe some bullet points or some check marks. But it gets too much if it's under that, more than 3 pages to me. Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of my mentors in the industry a while back always told me, you should tell people it's almost like a highlight reel on ESPN, right? Like you want your resume to reflect the really great accomplishments, and you need to tailor your resume based on, you should have multiple versions of a resume, right?
Yep.
So depending on the position in the company, you're going to want to tweak some things after you're looking at the job description. Like, oh, you know what? I did do that. Let me add that in and I'll take this out.
Right.
And, she told me you should always be telling candidates to keep it simple. Like you said earlier, we just want to see the highlighted things and the accomplishments that you've done, that the recruiter or hiring manager, then when they're reading the resume, you want them to go, ooh, I want to ask more about this particular project. But to your point, I'm always a proponent of the 10-year, because, especially nowadays when technology and software plays a big part in a lot of people's positions, whether you're a lawyer or you're an educator or an accountant, after 10 years, most things that you did 10 years before that are gone and they've all updated. So keeping it relevant. So I'm with you, Marianne. I think the 10 years is a really good starting point. And then I always tell people, if you had fantastic roles after that or before that, prior, list them at the bottom, list them off and then put how many years you were there. So if you want to show somebody, hey, I was at this company for 15 years, for sure, highlight that. But, we don't need to see everything you did since the start of your career. So I think 10 years, a decade is a good amount of time to kind of summarize what you've been doing. But just to keep it simple and highlight the things and be very particular on the positions that you're applying to. You definitely want to take a look at the job description first, right? You want to look at the company, and then you kind of want to tailor your resume to show the accomplishments that could tie in with that. So it's just not super generic. So it really does take a lot of work on the front end. It's not just updating it and putting your most recent accomplishments. It's really kind of doing the research yourself, because that'll set you up for success. If you're tailoring each, you might have 3 or 4 different resumes depending on your position and your career.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And the reason that I don't want to go, in this day and age where people are kind of biased, they're still biased about age, race, and things like that. I don't want you to put too many years back prior, because people will figure out how old you are. They'll figure out, what you've been doing. So just going back 10 years kind of shows that, I'm still available for work. I'm still looking for work. people are still biased about age discrimination. And so putting too much information on your resume can also, a future employer would figure out how old you are, and you won't even get a chance to get in the door because they figure that you're either too young or you're too old. So 10 years is a good spot. It's a good sweet spot.
Scott, let me ask you, with
Yeah.
like all the things that you've been posting recently, and you mentioned at the top, just, you know, folks that maybe didn't think they would be out of work and have been at some place for a very long time. And
Right.
I know I've had friends in the past reach out, and the question always is, where do I start? If I've been haven't been in the job market for a bit, not only is my resume not updated, but kind of where do I start looking? How do I start looking for new jobs? I think that's a big question to folks who this is all new for.
Well, the first thing I would advise anyone that's kind of found themselves displaced is you want to think about the circumstances that led to that. A lot of people, as we know, are being displaced right now simply just due to staff cuts with everything going on. We've seen full, colleagues of ours at other organizations, we've seen full recruiting teams cut simply just because they don't have the need at this time, and possibly not all those individuals will come back. I'm leery about the idea of paying someone to write my resume for me. Always have been, and I say that, not trying to knock the people that do it, because there's a lot of people that do it really well. But is it worth the money that you're going to sink into having somebody craft it for you when there's resources at your disposal that you can read through, that you can look through, that you can utilize. So that's kind of first and foremost. When I think about a resume now versus a resume 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you really do want to start kind of getting right into, if you do have a professional summary at the top, you do want to get into highlighting some of your accomplishments even that early. Maybe those are accomplishments that are overarching more of your career, that aren't specific to any one role. But the other thing that I'm seeing more of, and I'm happy to see more of it, is it used to be your information you'd list under an employer was simply just a retelling of your job description from back when you got hired. So, Melissa's our sourcing manager, so these are the roles of the sourcing manager at Qualigence. Well, that doesn't tell me anything about what Melissa did in that role. So that's kind of what I want to see. So when we start talking about achievements, 2 or 3, probably no more than 4 things that you've accomplished in that role that you feel strongest about. Because to your point, it's to get someone in an interview to ask you about those. And that's when you can really shine. Your resume should be used as really a jumping off point, a point of interest, a document to capture their attention, which again, to Mary Ann's point, is why in some cases less is more. You don't want to have a very lengthy and very long resume. So those are kind of some of the things I look for, is that professional summary should just be a couple sentences at the top that highlight some very important things that you've done in your career. And then you can share more achievements or accomplishments under, a couple bullets under each of the jobs that you've been in. I also like Mary Ann's point around the look and feel of it. I received one. I posted a couple weeks ago that if anyone wanted me to take a look at their resume free of charge, I was happy to do that. And the first person that sent it to me, it was a very clean, solid looking resume. It was 2 pages, but it used the margins, it used the headers and the footers. So it pretty much used the entire page as it needed, but it was not overly done. It was not messy. The education was into a column in the left. Specific projects that they wanted to call it were to the left. The body of the resume consisted of the role, the title, the years, the company, the key accomplishments, and then moved down to the next role. So it was very chronologically well laid out, but it was very strategically laid out as well. The other thing that I think people think about still including in resumes that they don't have to anymore are references. As recruiters, if we get to the point where we have an offer for you, we're going to ask you for references. Our client's going to ask us to conduct reference checks. That's when we'll ask for references. You don't need to have a page or half a page of 3 or 4 professional references on your resume. if you're looking to condense space. Some people still put references available upon request as a line at the bottom. I don't even know if that's necessary, because if a company is interested in hiring you, they're going to ask for references anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's going back to what you had said, Melissa, as far as where do you go? I think the first step is to, first of all, just breathe, because I know it's shocking for everyone, especially if you've never been laid off or been furloughed or whatever, fired. Just take a deep breath. Volunteer your services, maybe at a food bank, especially now, or someplace where you feel like you can produce or feel wanted. And then also, there's a lot of companies that are hiring. A lot of companies, what I call, that are corona-proof. I mean, you name it, manufacturing. And I know it sounds like, that's beneath me, or I've never done that kind of work before, and that's just not my style. Try it and see. A lot of supply chain roles are out there. So look into that. Take some classes online for computer coding. Again, let people know that you're looking. Maybe even go to LinkedIn, put your resume on LinkedIn, talk to people, network with people. Talk to your friends and family saying that you're looking for work. Yep. But again, volunteering is can do a lot, and can go a long way for someone who's looking, because other people may know some other folks that you're volunteering at this company or service, and you never know. Word of mouth is always key nowadays.
I think people forget to go back to those. That's great for volunteering. And I think just what you mentioned, just as simple, the first thing I've always told my friends when they found themselves in that situation is go on LinkedIn. First of all, check your network, right? Start reaching out to folks that maybe you did business with in the past that are at a senior level, or not even a senior level, just a friend at a certain company where you saw that they were hiring on their website. Leverage the relationships that you built over your career, right? To, when you're in need, now maybe you helped somebody out at some point and they'll return the favor. And I think right now, so many people want to help people. And I know for me, if somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, I'm looking, I need help now, I can definitely start going through my network and see if there's any roles that I know might be a good fit. But I just think starting back at the basics of, if you've been working and then you don't, for 10 years, you haven't looked for a job, kind of think of how much this landscape has changed in how we look for jobs now. So yeah, you can go to the company websites, but use your own network, leverage the folks that you have in your network. And if you don't have a great network in LinkedIn, start making one. Yeah. Go find, an HR person at a company if you're really interested. Have a friend introduce you to that person. I mean, you have to get creative on how you're reaching out to people. So don't panic if you don't have a great LinkedIn. You can always build that up. Scott, I don't know if you have any advice on that, working with a lot of executives and.
Yeah, I think that what's important too is a lot of times, and I understand that certain industries demand this of their employees, where your LinkedIn is nothing more than company, title, years of experience, company, and there's no information. And some companies say, that's how we want your LinkedIn to look. Unless you work for one of those organizations and you're kind of hamstrung by that. But if you're looking now, you're probably not working for that organization. Don't be afraid to build out your LinkedIn profile. Yeah. More and more recruiters and HR professionals are going to go to your LinkedIn, sometimes even before they're going to look in their own applicant tracking system. The reason being is, if we're being transparent, as someone who used to be a corporate recruiter, you get a lot of unqualified people in your ATS. Even you do, Marianne. Even for the most senior level roles. So one of the places they're going to look is they're going to look on your LinkedIn, and they're going to do something called Boolean searching, which is essentially a fancy way of saying keyword searching. And it's how all three of us work. It's how other recruiters work. You're going to, the more you have on your LinkedIn profile, the more it's going to flag certain words that they're looking for. I would also not be afraid, once you put, say, in your header, Scott Wilson, Managing Director, Quality International, actively seeking new opportunity. There's nothing wrong with that. There are recruiters that actually will search those two words connected together. And they might reach out to you first. So I would also make sure that, this will sound pretty obvious, but if your LinkedIn was tied to your employer's email and you're no longer working there, make sure to change it to your personal email.
That's a really good point.
Because otherwise, when a recruiter reaches out to you by sending you a message or in mail, if it's connected to your old work email, you're not going to see it. So you want to make sure you have it, set up that way as well. So, to Marianne's point, there's a million and one things you can edit on your LinkedIn profile as well that you may not put on a resume, but they're there for, the availability to do that for LinkedIn. And there are tutorials on how to fill out your profile, and there's plenty of things posted online. So, I wouldn't also pay anyone to build my LinkedIn profile for me at this point either. So I think those are all important. I think the most important thing, and you both touched on it, it's just leveraging your network as much as possible. Now more than ever, it's reaching out to people. If you see a job posted online and you know anyone within that organization, even if they're in an individual contributor position, and your first thought might be, well, they're not going to be able to help me. If you don't know, if you don't ask. So reach out to that person and ask. They may be able to connect you with someone in the HR organization. They may be able to connect you with a hiring leader for a business unit that might then reach out to you. We're finding more and more people are getting hired based on networking and referrals far more than just posting a resume and waiting around. When you do have interviews, don't be afraid to reach out to that person to thank them, but also to ask them for feedback if you didn't receive it. It's not being pushy. It's not being rude. It's be professional, call up, reintroduce yourself if you have to, and just ask them for feedback. Understand that some HR organizations are not going to provide a ton of feedback, but if it's a good company, they should be able to provide you feedback on the status of your application, on the status of your interviews, and some feedback relative if they did not choose to select you as to why. So those are things to think about as well. Is there anything when either one of you, is there anything when you think about the resume itself that we didn't discuss that you want to make sure we discuss? One thing I did want to bring up is, does anybody need cover letters anymore for resumes?
I know, really.
Reads them.
Well, some companies still want a cover letter. They want to see how committed you are about investigating on the company and the role. They don't want a generic cover letter. They want to see how interested you are in this position and what you know about the company and the role. But, it is kind of obsolete a little bit because, again, I just go to the next page when I get cover letters.
Right.
And I'm also seeing that people are using their pictures of themselves on resumes, which is kind of teetering. It's kind of icky.
Very European.
What you say?
It's very European on the CVs. Everybody.
But I'm seeing it on this side too a lot. And so at that point, I kind of take the picture off because I still want the person to be judged on what they can do, not by the way they look. And a lot of people are, still that way. Oh, she's cute, so I think I'm going to hire her. So we have to be careful with that as well, having pictures on resumes. But you're right. And you got to think outside the box when it comes to your resume. You might not get the same job that you had for 10 years. Look outside the box, do something different. You may have to start from the beginning and work your way back up. But at least you're back in the workforce. You're a viable, and you're still viable whatever. But you want to be somewhere that you're going to be happy. I know it sounds corny, but you want to be somewhere happy and successful and that you are making a difference in your life and someone else's life.
Times are changing, and they're going to continue to change. And for those of us that were around, 2007, 2008, 2009, the last time the economy really took a wallop, we were able to, not just as an organization, our organization, but, companies were able to rebound from that. Some it will take longer than others. Some will be able to come back. The job market will get hot again. There will be more and more opportunities than there are viable candidates in a few years. So I think the one thing that is, as hard as it is right now, I would preach patience for people with everything going on. Be persistent, be professional, but be persistent. and continue to work. I think if we kind of recap, the objective section of a resume, we don't necessarily need to see that. Replace that with some professional summary information about yourself with some accomplishments listed in there. We don't need every job that you've worked in the last, 15, 20 years, especially if you've moved around a bit. That can sometimes create a flag of, well, why has this person moved so much? I mean, early in my career, I moved quite a bit. I can explain any of it, but it was so long ago. If it's not as relevant to the roles I would look for in the future, I would just omit it anyway. From that standpoint. So, and then replace the canned job descriptions of what you think people want to see of what you did, and replace it with achievements and accomplishments. Don't forget to highlight your education. You spent a lot of time and money earning that. So, as well as any special skills that you have, whether you think they're relative to the role or not, highlight those, especially language skills, as Marianne pointed out. And lastly, brevity is key. Keep it to a few pages. The longer it is, odds are people aren't going to dig that far back on the document anyway. They're going to look at the most recent role you've been in. If that raises some questions, they might look at the role before that. They're not going to look back at jobs that you had 10, 15, 20 years ago, even if they are relevant to the role that you're applying for. So I think if people do that, it should certainly help. We know this is a trying time for everybody, which is why we wanted to try to post some thoughts and ideas online. But any kind of final thoughts from either one of you?
One more thing, and I don't know if we mentioned that, but make sure if there's a gap in your employment, please put something in your resume. I don't want to see a resume that goes from 2015 to 2018. You can put something down there. Maybe you were taking care of family, you went back to school, but that puts up red flags. So please put down that gap. If there's any gaps in your resume from one year to the next year, what were you doing? I don't know what you were doing. So it could be school, it could be taking care of a family member or a family emergency. Just put it down. A lot of people think, well, I didn't think it was necessary, so I didn't put it down. Or I was working a contract role for these 2 months or these 3 months or this 6 months or whatever. Put it down, because I want to know exactly how did you go from this role to that role, and why is there a 6-month gap or a 1-year gap in your resume? Make sure you put that in your resume, because that puts up red flags for employers and potential hiring managers. And again, think outside the box. You may not get the same job that you were working in the past 5 years. Do something different. Just don't be pigeonholed into one thing. Keep your options open. Have a good attitude. Be consistent. Consistently put out resumes. Make it a goal every day. This is how many resumes I'm going to put out. This is how many people I'm going to contact. And I've even seen where people are doing video resumes. So it's almost like you're auditioning for a job. You're auditioning. And so be creative. Put a link on your LinkedIn of an actual video of you talking to a potential employer. Just think outside the box. It's a crazy time, and you have to do very creative things, especially when it comes to your resume.
I would say, to echo that, keep it simple, what you said, Scott. We're not trying to read a novel when we're looking at a resume. Somebody in the industry once told me before, it's almost like it's a sales pitch, but on paper, right? So you have visually probably the first page of someone to screen down and look at your resume. So you want to use bullet points. You don't want to do giant paragraphs full of information, because nobody's going to want to pick out exactly, you want to keep it very organized, highlight things, separate it so you can tell the jobs that you were doing, the title of the role that you had, how many years. I should not have it to be guessing these kind of things. So just keeping it simple and starting at those places. And a huge tip, send it out to friends, professional friends of yours, either in the same industry or maybe somebody that you might know in HR. Send it to them and say, hey, can you do a once over of my resume and offer me pointers? Does this look good to you, before you start sending it out? And same goes for your LinkedIn. Like you mentioned, Scott, like unless your company previously said you can't do it, make sure you update your LinkedIn to almost look like a little bit of a resume, right? But maybe a shortened down version. But have a friend that is in the same industry, or somebody maybe at a higher level than you, or HR, that you can say, hey, I just updated my LinkedIn. You check it out. Is there anything I should add or take off? Any keywords I should be putting in there? So just use your network. Again, keep it simple, be creative, and keep persistent with it. But leverage the networks and the relationships you've built in the past, few years of your career to help you out at a difficult time. I think that's the best place to start.
Absolutely. And obviously one of the reasons we wanted to record this video is I elaborated on a little bit in the beginning is, our hearts do go out for those who kind of went into work one day and everything was great. And all of a sudden they're now finding themselves unemployed and they're looking for new work. Any of the three of us would be more than happy. Connect with us on LinkedIn, find us on LinkedIn. We're not hiding. Connect with us. I'm still open to people sending me their resumes to review them. I'll spend time in the evenings, on the weekends doing it. Be patient with us, obviously, if you do that. Ask us to just take a peek at your LinkedIn profile too. We're more than happy with everything going on right now in the economy to help out wherever we can. And the most important part is it's of no cost to the individual. So with that, as a wrap up, thanks to Marianne and Melissa for joining me today. Continue to keep an eye on Qualigence and most importantly, Recruiter Fuel for tips and tricks relative to the staffing and recruiting industry. And we look forward to talking with everybody soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And if you're looking for more in-depth and comprehensive recruiter training, check out the Recruitment Education Institute. All courses are free until May 15th. If you'd like to be featured on Recruiter Fuel, feel free to reach out to us at info@qualigence.com.